Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about content-specific introductions and meaningful conclusions. I hope that this tutorial is helpful for any thesis or research writing, especially in the writing of sections of a thesis paper, say for example the introduction and conclusion of a methodology section within a larger work. So let's get started. So, in this section, we are going to look at meaningful organization versus formulaic organization. I will use the term formulaic or generic to talk about organizational language that doesn't say anything new about the topic. And meaningful organization, we will look at what makes content-specific introductions and conclusions more meaningful to your reader and to sharing your ideas. We'll look specifically at content-specific introductions and then meaningful conclusions to tie your entire writing together. So let's look at some examples of organizational language and decide, is it meaningful or is it formulaic? So some common examples that I get from students are, in this section I will describe the findings, or this section is divided into 4 parts, or this section presented the findings, the next section will present the discussion. This is of course organizational language. It's telling the reader what you are going to do or what you have done in that section, and that can be helpful, but a lot of times it feels formulaic. And so instead of just saying what you will do, try to start doing it. That means in your introduction, give clear claims, clear purpose, clear ideas of what your section or paper does in the present tense, instead of saying what you will do. Just go ahead and start doing it. When you talk about the division of your writing, tell us why you divided it like that. How does the organization follow some analysis that you've made on the writing, for example? And where you tell the reader what you did, or any of your introduction or conclusion, try to avoid phrases that are so generic that they are true of every finding section of every thesis ever. All finding sections present the findings. All finding sections are followed by a discussion section. So the language of this section presented the findings tells us nothing new. We know that it presents the findings because it has the topic findings as the header of that section. So try to use original language to describe what your writing does and to show us why it matters. So let's look at some examples. Of course, every introduction should introduce the main idea of the paragraph or section. It should also make a specific or arguable claim. This is like a topic sentence or a thesis statement. And of course, the introduction should prepare the reader for the explanations of that claim, maybe give the organization or what sections or subsections are going to be found in this section or chapter. Let's look at a formulaic example, which is from a student that has written during their findings section. So they write, "The purpose of this chapter is to consider the main findings which emerged during a thorough analysis of the data. Moreover, the main findings are considered in relation to the literature review. Some unforeseen findings are explained. This chapter presents discussion findings related to the research question, which is to clarify losing motivation of students in online learning environments." So let's look at the 3 goals. Does this introduction introduce the main idea? I think yes. There's a beginning of an idea that we are going to discuss the findings related to losing motivation of students in online learning. However, the rest of this, the first 2 or 3 sentences, don't give us anything specific to the content. There is no, for example, a specific arguable claim in this introduction. It just gives us a general topic. We also don't know how the reader or how the author is going to present those ideas, and so the reader's not so prepared to follow the discussion that is coming after this introduction. Here's another example of a formulaic introduction. It begins, "This chapter will focus on the discussion of the research. The purpose of the research is to explore how online teacher professional portfolio improves teaching experience. This chapter will discuss the finding from the small-scale research and literature." Again, we have a purpose. We know what this topic is about, but we don't have any specific arguable claim. They do remind us of the overall purpose of the research paper, but they don't tell us what the discussion will bring, what the findings actually showed. And we have no preparation for what types of explanations are going to come after this. Every discussion chapter focuses on the discussion of the research. Every discussion chapter discusses the findings from the research and the literature. So these statements are not so useful in terms of telling the reader what is coming next. Here, we can start to see a more meaningful introduction. This student has said, the findings revealed that blogging helps part-time master students develop their writing skills in English through learning from other students in terms of grammar, writing style, content, organization, and ideas, through reflecting on the instructor's feedback and comments, and through receiving information about useful academic sources. Now, this is a wordy sentence. Maybe it could be divided into a couple sentences, but what we've done, what we see a difference in this one, is that the student has given clear findings from the previous section. We do have a main idea. We have the beginnings of a specific arguable claim. We know what they found. If this is a discussion section, we still don't have the claim of what this means. We have a nice statement of the focus. We don't have yet a clear claim, and we still don't have this preparing the reader for the explanations of that claim. So how can we do these three things in a meaningful way? Now, it may sound a little ironic that I have created a formula to produce meaningful writing, but I want just to give some examples, and I don't recommend using these as templates, but to make sure that every introduction that you write has these main three things. The first is a main idea, the second is a purpose or a claim, and the third is an organization for what comes. So let's look at these examples that are on the right. The findings of this small-scale qualitative study revealed X. In addition to telling you the findings, or what you found, or the conclusion of your previous section, you might remind the reader that this is a small-scale qualitative study, or a mixed method study. And then give us the actual finding. State it in the briefest, concisest way that you can to give us an idea what you are going to talk about. This is the main idea of this. But what's the purpose? What are you doing in this section, and why are you doing it? This section shows how X applies to Y. For example, what is the purpose? This section shows how motivation of students applies to educational practice in terms of teachers planning better lessons. This begins to look at the implication of that finding. And the final goal of your introduction is to give us an organization. What is coming next in the section? So the following subsections outline X, Y, and Z. We see where we're going. First, we're going to look at the findings again, but then we're going to compare it to the literature. We are going to discuss implications. We are going to suggest further research. If you can state those clearly and specifically, the reader is ready for the ideas that would then explain those categories. In terms of the conclusion, we want to do similar things as the introduction. We want to, instead of introducing the main idea, we want to restate the main idea of the paragraph or that section. We also want to show or remind the reader how that claim was successfully argued. And finally, we want to prepare the reader for the next section. What is coming after this one? An example of a formulaic or generic version, students sometimes write, all collected data will serve as a basis for the analysis and interpretation of the information in the finding sections, where the results will be presented. This is maybe at the end of the methodology, right before the findings. Again, this statement is true of every methodology section and doesn't give the reader anything meaningful. Another example, the student writes, in this chapter, I discussed the methodology of my qualitative study, how I selected the participants, collected the data, and analyzed them. The results and findings of the collected data will be presented in the next chapter. It is good to have this language. It helps us to know what you did and what you're going to do next. But it's in very, very generic or broad terms. Can we make it more specific? And can we answer the question, why did we do these things? And how does what we just did apply to what we are going to do? So again, a formula to help you make more meaningful conclusions would be to achieve these main three steps. So this section demonstrated X. What did this section do? What was your idea? And you can state it in past tense, focus on what the section did. The second is, by examining X, it is clear that Y. How are you connecting one idea to the other? What was the purpose of doing a methodology section? What's the purpose of doing a discussion section? What did you look at, and what can you conclude from that? Restate your findings or your main idea of the section here in the conclusion. And then the last one is what is a really fundamental change of how we talk about what comes next. The next section takes X and Y, say for example your main idea and your purpose, and it applies it to Z. What is coming next in the next section, and how does what you did in the discussion section apply to your conclusion section? What does your literature review have to do with your findings? What does your methodology have to do with your findings? So in your conclusion is a great place where you can show your reader that you have a plan, you have a purpose for doing all of these things, and tell us exactly, in terms of online learning, in terms of blogging and student motivation and teacher portfolios, how do those things apply to educational practice, for example? How do those things apply to future research? So we don't just want to say what you did and what you're going to do, but to give us content, give us the actual ideas that you have presented and how they matter to the next section. So just to review, we talked a lot about meaningful organization, and this should go throughout your whole writing, but meaningful organization means three specific things. It means giving content-specific information in your introductions and conclusions. Don't be vague, be specific. The second is that meaningful organization means reminding your reader of the purpose of each section. Why did you do what you did? And how does it connect to your other sections, both in your introduction and your conclusion. And finally, meaningful organization means avoiding generic phrases from the rubric that are true of every thesis. This thesis analyzed the findings is what every discussion section does. So those statements are not very helpful in terms of giving new meaning or giving a purpose or making it clear why you are writing what you've written. So I hope this tutorial was helpful. Look forward to talking to you again soon.